A sixth grade teacher gave a math problem to her students to see how they would solve it. And the problem had to do with an inheritance. So the students were asked, if a man were to leave at his death $10 million, with 1/5 going to his wife, 1/5 going to his son, 1/6 going to his nephew, and the rest to charity, how much would the charity get? And there was a long pause in the classroom, and then one student raised his hand and said, "A lawyer." Yes, we're very serious about our money, aren't we? How do we divide it? This was the problem posed to Jesus in the gospel today, and he would have none of it. He was asked to help this young man get his brother to divide their inheritance. Well, my father was an attorney and did much of his work in wills and estates, and he assured me that it was unbelievable what people would fight about at the time of death of a loved one. In families where there were divisions, the divisions would get deeper, and it could be over something as simple as grandmother's rocking chair. The children would never, or grandchildren would never speak to one another again. How tragic when things become more important than people. Notice in the gospel today, Jesus reminds us that we must beware of all covetousness, or that's the old word for greed. Beware of greed, because a man's life does not consist in an abundance of his possessions. In fact, many times we allow the possessions to possess us, right? God created us to love people and use the things he gave us. But unfortunately, we have turned that upside down, and in many cases we love things and use people. Just the exact opposite of God's design. That's why we find ourselves in a world very often that is godless, all too tragically known to us just yesterday again, with the shootings and the deaths of innocent people. When we put things above people, Paul even puts it more forcefully. Listen to what Paul said in our second reading today in his letter to the Colossians. He said, quote, "Put to death then the parts of you that are earthly, immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and the greed that is idolatry." Wow. He's calling greed idolatry. Putting, again, things above God and relationship. Notice God is a trinity of relationship, Father, Son, and Spirit, for all eternity. Never a thing. We do not speak of God as an it or a thing. God is a living being, and those relationships are most important for us as a lesson of unity in the midst of the diversity of the persons of the Holy Trinity. Blessed John Henry Newman, the great convert to the Catholic faith in England in the 19th century, after whom the Newman Centers on universities, he was such a scholar, they're named after him. Blessed John Henry Newman, in the 19th century already, this is the 1800s, was concerned that the world was, quote, bowing down before wealth and notoriety, fame, your moment of fame, your moment on the internet, your moment on whatever. That was already in the 1800s. How much more so today? Wealth and notoriety. Are we possessed by things and losing the respect and the dignity for persons? There was a time some of your family will recall in the Depression, 19 29 and then in the 1930s, where people had so few things, they reached out to people, but sometimes people were missed. I remember one gentleman telling me that as a little boy, he remembered the greatest tragedy from the Depression era that he knew was that his next door neighbor's baby died because they didn't have enough milk. And the neighbors didn't know it. There wasn't enough milk, and the baby died. I remember another story from the Depression where a family took their child to the doctor, and I think that the child had pneumonia, and the doctor wanted that child to have protein every day for the next 7 days to get stronger and heal. And so he prescribed an egg a day for 7 days. The husband had lost his job because of the Depression. Mom was taking care of the kids at home, and they were too poor to provide even for 1 egg a day. Now, we live in such superabundance today, that's hard for us to imagine. But that was the reality. So they spoke to their pastor, and he said, pray to God specifically for that intention, that you need an egg for the next 7 days. Well, the next morning, as the mom was looking out the back window into her yard from the sink in the kitchen, she saw a little red hen show up. And that little red hen laid 1 egg and then walked away. So she went out, she got the egg, boiled the egg. Her little girl had an egg. They kept praying, and the next day, the hen showed up, and the next day, and every day would lay 1 egg for 7 days. And by the way, her husband, by the end of that week, found a job. The baby got better, the child got better. And on the 8th day, she kept looking out the back window. The hen never returned. It did exactly what they needed, exactly what they had prayed for, came and went mysteriously. One of the titles for God is the provider. Deus providebit. God who provides. But we have to have the pearl of great price in our souls, which is faith, to believe that God is indeed a provider. And we have to have things in right order. In reflecting on what St. Paul said in his powerful letter to the Colossians, after he points out those things that are turning us away from God, like our covetousness, the false god of things, and our advertising sure does a good job of helping us to want more things, right? I mean, they do an outstanding job. And so when we go to the store and we need 1, maybe 2, because it's on sale, we'll get 6, maybe 12. Now, maybe that's, for a big family, that's a prudent thing to do. But if we're never going to use it, how much more blessed is it that we should give than to receive? Share the abundance. See, the wealth is not the problem. It's what we do with it. St. Paul did not say that money is the root of all evil. He did not say that. He said, because money can be used for much good and necessary things. He said the love of money is the root of all evil. See, that connects with what Jesus is saying about idolatry. Because idolatry is worshiping a false god. So loving the money, so that it's all about more and more and more money for the sake of the money. To be able to say, I have so much more. I'm famous because I've accomplished this. Rather than using money for the good and the needs of others. So, St. Paul then, going beyond this text about our wrath and our anger and our malice and our etc., he says this, instead, put on as God's chosen ones, you who are holy and beloved. This is who we are by our baptism, by our relationship with God. He says, put on compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, forbearing with one another, and forgiving as the Lord has forgiven you. And above all these, put on love, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. This is the remedy that our world doesn't seem to know very well, because we are expounding hate and violence and allowing false gods to deceive us. Another great mystic of the 14th century, a Dominican by the name of Johannes Tauler, came upon a beggar one day, and he said to the beggar, "My friend, God give you a good day." And the beggar answered, "I thank God I have never had a bad one." And then Tauler continued, "Well, God give you a happy life then, my friend." And the beggar said, "I thank God I've never been unhappy." And Tauler, surprised that he could say these things, said, "Well, what do you mean, sir?" And the beggar continued, "Well, when the weather is fine, I thank God. And when it rains, I thank God. When I have plenty, I thank God. And when I am hungry, I thank God. And since God's will is my will, whatever pleases God pleases me. Why should I say I am unhappy when I am not?" Isn't that an incredible attitude? Accepting the good and the bad, the ups and the downs. Somehow this is in the divine plan. And so if we can have a change of attitude, then we might experience beatitude, the blessedness of the children of God. I conclude with these words from the saint who is honored on the 4th day of August, a great priest from southern France, St. John Vianney. And he said these words for our reflection. The Christian's treasure is not on earth, but in heaven. Our thoughts then ought to be directed to where our treasure is. This is the glorious duty of man, to pray and to love. If you pray and love, this is where your happiness lies. Prayer is nothing else but union with God. When one has a heart that is pure and united with God, he is given a kind of serenity and a sweetness that makes him ecstatic, a light that surrounds him with marvelous brightness. In this intimate union, God and the soul are fused together like two bits of wax that cannot be pulled apart. This union of God with a tiny creature is a lovely reality. It is a happiness beyond understanding.